Morning, everyone. Hello. So yeah, everyone all seems a bit tame after everything because we've got the COVID inquiry heating up this week, but maybe we'll have some more to talk about that on Thursday. But I thought I'd talk about trains today, and I'll tell you why. Because we know of the public services that are all, of course, collapsed. I mean, there isn't a single public service that's really working at all. And the obvious solution to many of these things is, of course, nationalisation. But when people say nationalise, what they actually mean is spend hundreds of billions of pounds buying out shareholders and taking on debts, losing the next election, and the government just give it all away again when they come back to power. So we need a cheap way of doing it. And there are various ways of doing that. In the case of rail, Labour's policy, of course, is to just take the rail companies into public hands as and when their contracts expire. But here's the difficulty. Some of these, I mean, I said, as soon as Labour announced that policy, I said, well, they're just going to give them all really long contracts, aren't they? And they have just given Avanti, one behind me, a 9-year contract. Morning, Daily Blase and everyone else. So they've just given them a 9-year contract, which means, of course, Labour would need to win like, I mean, I suppose they could just about take it into public hands before the second election in power, but, you know, blimey. But it raises the question, so what do they do in the meantime? Because the problem is not, I mean, there's multiple problems. First of all, for example, so the reason I discuss this is because Louise Haigh, who's Labour's shadow transport secretary, so she would be, unless there was another reshuffle, but I don't think there's going to be, she would be, Avanti is shite, aren't they all shite? She would be the transport secretary. And she was just saying yesterday on Twitter, I'll read it out, more chaos on our railways as Avanti cancels hundreds more services. Now, this is, of course, a bit of a problem with rail services. Because they're focused on profit, there's a lot of services that are not that profitable. When I was coming back from Liverpool, my last connection was cancelled. You know, it was late night, minor line. They obviously thought, oh, it's not going to make much money, or indeed any money. So they just cancelled it. And of course, my attitude should be, well, no. You do. These are the services you're supposed to be putting on. Can you do that? Can you come up with a business model that allows you to do it? No, then bugger off. We'll bring it into public hands. That is my attitude. So the question then becomes, let's look at just Avanti, just because I know that is one they cannot just bring into public hands quickly. Because it's I don't know if there are going to be any rail companies whose contracts expire when Labour in their first term in office to kickstart the process. So they're surely going to have to do something about it. In fact, Anglo North saying, haven't they just announced a load of train cancellations? Indeed, yeah, that's what Haigh is saying. And I know she does this a bit. She regularly, because I follow her on Twitter, and she regularly moans about the pissing trains. More, not because, or of anything else, but because they keep getting cancelled. And the thing is, people plan journeys. And when you're using trains, you're planning fairly long journeys, and you're probably planning it in advance. And if your train's, cancelled, not just a few minutes late, but cancelled, that can if you need it to get to work or get home from work or something like that, that's completely thrown everything out, isn't it? So they need, unless it's physically impossible, unless there's a tree on the line where obviously you cannot get the train through until it's cleared. You cannot just cancel trains because, we don't think we're going to make much money from this. So they have to be sort of forced at the very least. Now, what I thought was interesting is Labour don't seem to have any detailed policies on this. Labour's policies, I can read them out in terms of their current state. Obviously, I don't know what the secret document is that's intended for the manifesto, which could still change again anyway. But in terms of what has been publicly talked about, I mean, bring railways into public ownership as contracts with existing operators expire. So we know that. Unfortunately, the policy was to deliver high speed too. That's not happening. That's basically it. You know, when I read sort of their transport policies as they were known earlier this year, as they were published earlier this year, in terms of railway policies, and I've not been able to find any updates apart from the fact they now cannot go ahead with HS2 as originally intended. Bringing railways into public ownership as contracts expire. Absolutely nothing. Can't they just nationalise the trains and compensate the companies? Yeah, but Gary, this is the problem, isn't it? Compensating the companies means buying them out. And that, so you're talking about, I don't actually know even how much it would be for trains to do that. For water companies, it would cost you hundreds of billions. Well, for nationalisation in general, it would cost you many hundreds of billions. So, yeah, here's the trap, right? Here's the nationalisation trap. If you just buy the companies, you have to borrow for that, and you have to borrow a lot of money because you'll be paying a high rate for it. You know, look at Elon Musk when he was buying Twitter. He paid well over the odds for it. Why? Because they knew he wanted to buy it. So the same thing. If Labour are committed to buying it, all of a sudden the price of the shares goes up and you have to pay those. You can't just steal them. So it would cost a lot. And that has to go onto the national debt because that can't come out of your day-to-day spending because we already don't have enough of that. So that goes onto the debt pile, right? Impact for customers to begin with, zero. Because you first of all, you've got to start paying off that debt. You've got to improve the infrastructure. You've got to do everything else. So the actual, and put on all these services. So all that happens is you create this debt pile. The public don't really see any improvement straight away. So come the next election, the Tories say, well, there was no improvement. They didn't do anything to improve it. And now you've got this huge debt pile for you, your children, your grandchildren. So that's a non-starter. You have to do it on the cheap. Now, regulation is absolutely the way you do it. I'll go through a few more comments before I go on to linking it to where Labour do have detailed policies and seeing which ones may actually suit. Simple fix. Every train company must run one service every hour at £10.50 per ticket. Then people pay a reasonable price. You encourage train fares to go down. So obviously the contracts are a legal document as well. You can't just change the terms of the contract unilaterally. So you won't be able to do anything like that. However, I am not aware, and I'm not an expert, but I'm not aware of anything that would stop Labour insisting that they deliver their full service. Because here's the thing, let us link this to another public service where Labour have a lot of policies. Water. This is my favourite one, by the way. I'm always banging on about this. So let us look at, although Labour do not have any policies for the private rail companies that I am aware of, I might have missed something, but I've not seen anything published. So apart from taking them into public hands, but while they're in private hands, I don't actually know what Labour's policies are. Little super chat here. Electric Gaming, £5 super chat. Thank you very much. So service levels are set by Department for Transport, not the operators. Terms and conditions are only paid to manage. No, TOC, sorry. Only paid to manage the day-to-day running of the operating areas. Yes, but the contract itself will say you can't just make us put on, like, you know, all these services for like next to nothing. You know, that won't be feasible. But it will be feasible to insist that they deliver a certain level of service. So, in other words, I think Labour will be able to say, no, you're not cancelling trains, unless there's actually a genuinely good reason. But linking it to water, let us read their policies for water companies. First of all, use regulatory powers to keep consumer bills down and ensure that water companies, rather than the public, pay for their failures. Now, I see that can come in. Okay, you can't like reduce necessarily the price, but you can stop it going up too high. And another thing you can do is if a train cancels a service due to something within its own control, because obviously if you've got a situation, you could say like, a tree falling on the track, something that is outside of that rail company's control. But if that rail company cancels a service due to something within its own control, you could issue automatic fines, and you could set those fines so that it's always cheaper for them to run the service than to cancel it. Because that way, if they're going to be automatically fined, because that's what they're going to do for water companies, automatic fines for spillages. It says, where was it now? Introduce mandatory monitoring of sewage outlets. Obviously, we don't need to do that for the trains. And automatic fines for sewage discharges. So you could say the same thing, couldn't you? You could say automatic fines for cancelled services where it was the train company's decision. In other words, the rail line, which they're not responsible for, the line is fine. They have chosen to cancel it for whatever. They'll have blamed something like staffing. Well, no, that's within their control. You make sure you've got enough staff. Johnny Copperhead, £5 super chat, says, give them a right good regulate until the pit squeak. Well, yeah, this is the old thing, isn't it? But honestly, that is what I would do. That is why when I read Labour's water policies, I just looked at them and thought, this is how you nationalise. Because Labour obviously are not talking about nationalising water. But at the moment, we know that the model is collapsing. They can't even maintain their business model under the Tories. How's it going to be if we properly regulate? So if you look at the water one, so I'll go through all of them and we'll see which ones are transferable. So use regulatory powers to keep consumer bills down. We could do that. It doesn't necessarily mean squeezing them too hard. You've got to, we don't want to end up in court over this and told that we're, breaking the law. But within the law, yes. Ensure that these companies, rather than the public, pay for their failures. So again, automatic fines for failures to deliver services, and make sure they can't just put up the price to pay for the fines. Set mandatory targets to halve water leaks. Well, the applicable one there is mandatory service levels, right? Strike off company directors who continually breach and ignore their responsibilities. You can apply that. You can apply that to any public service. You can do the same thing. If you are setting... in fact, the Conservatives will support this, presumably. They're all about minimum service, aren't they? Oh, the Conservatives all about minimum service when it comes to strike action. So why can't Labour be all about minimum service when it comes to corporate board action, right? So strike off company directors who continually breach and ignore their responsibilities. Ensure illegal activities punished. I'm not sure if there'll be much of that. So... and ensure payments of dividends are linked to key performance metrics. That can apply to any, and indeed should apply to every public service. And then introduce the mandatory monitoring of, we don't need that, automatic fines for sewage discharges, automatic fines for cancelled services that are their responsibility. With a penalty for outlets that do not have monitoring in place. There will be, obviously there'll be monitoring. If they cancel us, services are a matter of public knowledge anyway, so that's not an issue there. And then set ambitious targets to cut sewage outflows. In terms of setting ambitious targets for railway, I would just say we need to expand the rail network. Because I keep saying, where I live, there's no train station near me. The nearest train station to me is 20 miles drive away. 20 minutes drive away. And that's not like a main train station either. So if ever I need to go anywhere that's around the country, I will need to use that to get to the main state, Doncaster, basically. And then from there, in theory, I could drive to Doncaster, but that would be a slightly longer drive. It sometimes works out better to go to the 20-minute away one. But anyway. Right, some comments here. It says, Avanti had to get permission to reduce the number of services on the... West Coast Main Line, I think that is, WCML. For the remainder of the year, not enough staff to run them, apparently. Yeah, get more pissing staff. Hire more staff. This is what I think. See, for me, if I was the Transport Secretary, and obviously I'd have to be given permission by the, I can't just be a law unto myself. You have to, do what's within party policy. But I would be looking at it as, right, I want these things in public hands. So take Avanti, for example. So they've got a 9-year contract. So by the time the election rolls around, it's like 8 years left to go on it. I'm looking at that thinking, yeah, I want that in public hands sooner than 8 years. Now, you can't break the law. You can't steal it. You can't do anything like that. But what you can do is say, right, we know that train companies have already come into public hands before their contracts are run. The Conservatives have brought like train companies, I think twice, haven't they, into public hands? So that's under the Conservatives. So it does happen that sometimes you get a rail franchise that goes, oh, we can't make money from this. And they just abandon it and you can't find a buyer. But Labour don't even want to look for a buyer. They're just going to take it to public hands. So I would say, yes, regulate them properly. Make sure you go, no, these are the services you're delivering, deliver them, and you will be automatically fined for any you don't deliver that are your decision or that are your responsibility. So if they say not enough staff, it's like, well, you're going to pay a fine then. So which is cheaper, for you to get the staff or for you to pay the fine? Set the fine at a level. Again, you know, it has to be, you can't just fine them £1 billion or anything, but set the fine at a level where it's cheaper for them to deliver the service than it is to take the fine. And make sure it's an order for anything that's within their response. So if the line is fine, because that's not their responsibility. If the line is fine, then they deliver the service or they pay the automatic fine. I would do that as a minimum. I would also set these, and I would even bring this in, that company directors who continually fail to deliver the service will, because let's say they work out some cunning way to actually still pay the fines and not deliver the service, then strike them off as well. In fact, Katrina's saying 4 of them, I think. Northern, South Eastern, TransPennine, I think there was one other. Wasn't LCR? Hang on a minute. Shall we look them up? Now, not all of these ones that were taken to public hands may still be in public hands. Should we have a look? So at the moment, well, just quick Google search. This, I don't know whether this is in date or what. So Scottish Rail, Welsh Railways, we know about that. That's nothing to do with Westminster. East Coast Main Line, TransPennine, Northern, South Eastern, and the Caledonian Sleeper. Okay. In the case of the latest Avanti Manchester service cancellations, which train companies blaming on staff shortages, which the current legislation always them not including their service stats. So yeah, oh, that's another thing. Sometimes when they cancel them as well, they don't count as cancellation. It's like no. If you cancel a service, make it really simple. It's like, well, right, this is the timetable, right? This is your train timetable. Did each of these, if the service didn't run, it's none of this, oh, if you cancel it at such and time, it doesn't count as a cancellation. No, if you cancel it, cancel, right? If you cancel it, it's a cancellation. Either the service runs or it doesn't. It's binary. It either runs or it doesn't. But the... what was I saying now? Yeah, so none of this nonsense. Like, and again, staff shortages, it's like, don't let them come up with excuses. Like, that's why you don't have any exceptions to the fine other than it's something wrong with something that's outside of their control, which is the rail line. The train service itself is their control. If they say they don't have enough staff, hire more staff. What is it the Conservatives keep saying at the moment for a company? Oh, you can't get staff. Can you have visas? No, you can't have visas. You train more staff. Right, get them to train more staff. Market forces. You use this. You can use this all the time. Why can't you get more staff? Ask them that. Why can't you get more staff? Oh, there's people working. The Conservatives are telling us that there's loads of people looking for jobs. Why can't you hire them? Put it all back on them. Don't give them any excuses. If they're not running a service, then they're paying the fine. It's that simple. And they're not allowed to just increase their prices to compensate for the fine. You know, they're very tightly controlled there. They're only allowed to raise their prices in line with necessary increases of running costs, which includes staff wages, but doesn't include paying fines. Be really clear on that. One of the biggest problems for rail from my first-hand experience being a signaller, lack of staff and the over-reliance on the goodwill of staff to do overtime, need more well-trained staff. Yeah, but I mean, again, you put the emphasis on the train company to do that, because here's the thing. If you say to them, surely, again, I'm not an expert, but if you say to them, look, you're going to deliver this service or you're going to get fined. You're not allowed, when you're sort of talking about increasing train prices, you can factor in higher running costs, but the fines don't count as those running costs. So they're just taking out your profit. If you do things like this, one of two things happens. One, they have to hire the more staff because all of a sudden now they're getting fined more than it would cost to take on the extra staff or to pay them properly if they are genuinely struggling to recruit. Or the second thing is they just say, look, this is too much hassle. We're ending the contract. And the government, to which the Labour government go, no problem, because mutual agreement. Well, we want you to end the contract, so there you go. As long as the government don't do anything illegal, it's no good the train company saying, hang on, you're breaching our terms of contract, we're taking you to court. We don't want any of that messing about. But as long as you can do that, now that doesn't solve the other problem we have, which is limited rail capacity, but it at least stop, because it's you know, I don't travel very often, but if I do, it's like a nightmare scenario, but I think much worse for people who need the train to be able to commute. Because here's the other thing, like if you're, you know, there's two problems we have, isn't there, really, with people who need it to get to places for work. First of all, if the trains are unreliable, that hits GDP, that hits the UK's economy, doesn't it? Because that's productivity not occurring if someone can't get to work. And the other thing is, you know, so you have one problem when a service is completely cancelled, and then you have another one where it can't cope, which is what HS2 was supposed to deal with. So when you've got a situation where there's a train in Manchester that won't set off because there's too many people on it and the driver's saying some of you need to piss off and wait for the next one, which again is hitting productivity. So, you know, the railway should be prioritised much more than it is in the interest. And when people talk about, you know, Labour are going to have limited ability to actually really boost the economy, because they look at the situation and think, well, the economy's knackered, the global economy is not too great, and, you know, Brexit's knackered things, and we've got this massive debt, and, you know, public services are run down, massive high tax rate, we can't just increase tax rates and stuff like that. And people say, well, what are Labour going to do? There are lots of little things that Labour can do to just make things better. If we suddenly had a reliable rail service in this country, that would raise productivity instantly. Because then, you know, if you look at a train timetable, if you can be certain you can get on at this time and get to this place at this time to get your next train to this place and so on, if you can do that reliably, then that boosts productivity. But anyway, Howard's saying £1,000 fine doesn't exactly hit a millionaire the same way as some poor sod surviving on universal credit. Any Labour plans to address that gross inequity? And by the way, the Swisscom manager. I'm not sure what that's in reference to, sorry. I'm not talking about £1,000 fines for a cancelled rail service. I'm talking about more than that. But if it was in relation to something else, in terms of general fines, if this is a more general question, I don't know about Switzerland, but is it Sweden where if you're issued with a fine for, let's say, a speeding offence or something, you are fined according to, it's means tested. So if you're wealthy, you can pay a very, very high fine. And if you're not so wealthy, not so much. Steve Kirk, Super Chats, £10. Thank you very much there. But yeah. Oh, Anglo saying it's not letting you send a comment. Well, what's your comment? Did I miss it? Paul saying there, fines out of dividends, people will soon find rail shares unattractive, they never receive a dividend. Well, yeah, this is but this is it. And it's easy to do as well. It's actually not that difficult. I mean, they're going to do it for water companies anyway, so they know it's not that difficult. But it really isn't. It's like, you don't let the rail companies just put up the prices to what they want. They don't. That doesn't happen anyway. It has to be run through the government anyway. So the Department for Transport just check their business plan. If they're talking about raising prices, like, right, let's check your maths here. Let's check if this is reasonable. If it is to pay for, because wages have gone up. You don't want to. Certainly, a Labour government's not going to discourage that rather. So your running costs have gone up because of higher wages, and then there's other things as well that naturally go up, and that's all fine as long as it's included in the business plan. And it's like, okay, what's this? Oh, those are the fines we think we're going to have to pay. No. You take that out. That's not your running costs. Simple as that. That is not. It's so easy to do because these companies do not get to just set their own prices. The Department for Transport has to sign off on it. It's means tested in Finland as well, is it? Speeding fines of over $100,000 have been given out. It may have been Finland I was thinking of then. Or it may happen in Sweden as well. I often get mixed up. They're both quite cold. Hard to boost an economy that wants to restart an 80s-style capitalism model and compete with Chinese labour at the same time, providing good wages. Automation is the only thing that will do that. Well, the thing is, the Chinese are quite happy to automate as well, though, ahead of the game. But there's so many things you can do just to boost productivity, like lots of little things that you can do. And the same thing comes with the spending. People say, oh, Labour, sticking to these spending plans. It's like, well, depending on when the election's going to be, they probably have to anyway. Because like when you come to power, a budget basically takes a year to come up with. So you can't, when Labour come in, they can't just say, right, we're scrapping that budget and bringing the next one in. They're stuck with that budget anyway. But there's still things they can do to raise more. I mean, we know that they're going to be cancelling a load of tax breaks to raise more revenues without putting up the rate of tax. But there you go. Some comment here about, due to issues with the Mark 5 coaches and Class 68 trains going to be withdrawn in December officially, and not fully come into service, and they have no trains to replace the withdrawn trains. So what you're basically saying is they're not going to have enough staff and some aren't going to have enough trains. Is that what you're telling me? But there we go. Gary said, I don't want to get older, but I'm wishing a year away until Labour get in. Well, yeah, it may well be a year. Maybe a year today. Because there's all sorts of mad talk in the thing. Now the talk is of the general election being on Halloween next year, which is feasible. That will be a Thursday, because remember, it's a leap year next year. So it will actually be a Thursday. That would be an interesting one. It is possible. It's feasible. I still think that any talk of when the election's going to be in the mainstream media is probably just the Tories pissing about. But I really don't think it's going to be January. I don't think it's going to be a winter election. I don't think they could. I think they understand they cannot. Like, it's all right, Rishi Sunak, talk about Rishi Sunak, well, he just wants to loot as much as possible. I mean, he's not going to get much looting done over winter anyway. And also his own MPs are going to know, yeah, this is a non-starter. So if it's not May, and I still think there's a good chance of May, although I hope it's not for the wrong reasons. October the 31st, that is possible. Little bit dodgy, as I said before, because there's the danger then, although that technically doesn't run into the American presidential election, it runs very close. There is a fear that if you have a messy presidential election and a change of government in the UK, that's two of the Five Eyes who are sort of a little bit wobbly for a bit, which potentially invites cyber attacks. But we will see. But, the Tories won't give a shit about that. Apart from anything else, it'd be Labour getting the blame for that. Labour seems sure it's 2024 in recent members' packs. Well, they have to say that anyway. I mean, it's on the... Oh, yeah, I've got my thing now. Yeah, you get a car sticker, window sticker. Well, a window sticker, you put it in whatever window you like, I suppose. Yes, they've got a logo. It's not, I don't think it's... anyway. But yeah, there's a 24 logo. So yes, they do. You'd have to work on that assumption anyway. You'd have to work on that assumption. General election on Halloween. Is there anything in the law to prevent the dead standing for the Tories? What, you mean Anne Widdecombe? I don't think she's going to. I think she's going to stand for Reform UK. But Win 24, yeah. They've sent out all the stickers to everyone. Pack with everyone with stickers. So Cameron didn't do an emergency budget within 2 months of the 2010 election. Emergency budgets are not a full change of budget, though. It's just an emergency budget is just changing some things. It's not changing the whole thing, because you can't change the whole thing because it takes too long to work it all out. I mean, the things that Labour will be changing is removing tax breaks, but that will have to come in line. So if the election is October, for example, that gives them limited amount of time to work out the budget that they'll have to deliver in March. Whereas if the election is in May, then yes, you've still got that budget for the whole of 24-25. But then in March 2025, they can announce a new full budget. So it's completely lacks any distinguishing marks that show it's a Labour sticker. Well, I think that might be the plan. I think it's just general awareness, isn't it? It's just to get people. They want people to become familiar with the logo, so I think they do want people to associate it with, voting Labour. But I think it's just raising awareness of the general election, well, in general, if you see what I mean. So I think that is the idea, that it is something that could be seen as non-partisan. Can't see them doing a general election on the same day as local and mayoral elections. I think they want to separate them. I don't. I think they might, don't get me wrong. Like, if they don't want an election in May, then they won't have an election in May. But if they're going to have an election at any time around that, they do want it on the same days. Because here's the thing. Every set of elections that happens now, whether by-elections or local elections or mayoral elections, the Conservatives are facing a penalty while they're in government. Because there are going to, when people vote, whether it's a local election or a mayoral election or whatever, there are people who will use it to send a message to the national Westminster government, right? So at the moment, that message is anti-Tory. So you could have a mayoral election that takes place next year. Is it is the West Midlands one Conservative mayor? Is that up next year or something? So let's say you've got a Conservative mayor up for election next May, which there will be a couple. They are going to face a tougher time. It might be that if the election takes place on the same day, people then don't feel the need to protest against the Tories by voting against them in the mayoral elections, because they get to choose a different party for the general election, right? Whereas if the election is still to take place next May the 2nd, I think it is, then you'll get the anti-Tory vote out for the mayoral and local elections. So no, if the Tories are thinking, if they want to go for an election in May, they will want to go on May the 2nd. Anglo-Norse, £2 super chat, thank you very much, says, got it, 50 letter limit on super chat comments. Was that it? You spent all that time trying to type a comment and that was it? Okay, we've sort of run out of time anyway, so let's just go through if we've got any more. Article in The Guardian online today about, we call them immigrants, not expats, getting the vote even after they've been abroad for 15 plus years. Yes, that was promised in the manifesto. The Conservatives did promise to do that. I'm not actually sure, haven't they already done it? I'm not sure, because I'm not someone who lives abroad as an immigrant, not an expat. But that causes half the problems, Giving British immigrants a special name causes half of our problems. But anyway, but yeah, we'll leave it there anyway. Can the king reject the King's speech? No. Do you know what? It's really baffling when people say, why can't Charles do that? Why can't he sack Sunak? It's like he's a constitutional monarch. He's not a part of government. He does as he's told. He does as he's told. I know it looks very, because we're grown up with this idea that kings are bosses, but a constitutional monarch is not. The government tells him what to do, which is why he didn't attend COP last time, because the government said, we don't want you there. And as I did in one of my own videos recently, he then just got his own back by inviting a load of people to talk about climate change at the palace. But anyway, they're immigrants from our part of view, but immigrants in the country they're in. So they're immigrant. So from their point of view, they're an immigrant because they're in another country, right? So they should call themselves immigrants. They're only immigrants from our point of view. But there we go anyway. Thanks very much for coming on, everyone. Have a very good day. Have a very good Halloween. And until next time, I'll see you later.